工作人员，你讲的，请可以坐我们旁边，这边，在旁边一个，对不对？周乐园，周乐园，在那里。
Not yet. So you still yeah, upstairs. So then I trust your second room.
他们说他来找他。对了，
有摄像直播？
有啊，
这是连哪一？
这个，
对，对，那个镜头在哪？
对啊，
就是哦，
还可以收音呢，手上的。很大气哦，已经下来了。
我们可以进来一起。
6月的朋友， 配领带，配我的领带，
看，
读者，他各种跑去跟德国人
因为那是他的老位置，
靠一
这是给他洗。
没有，其他是放弃了。
我现在今天结束，才今天结束，我后面会站问题。
你要赶快举手啊！
你说心想会问，你说吴大哥会问我，
对。
可以，应该秀珍姐。
这样是会
没办法，因为它的这外面有多一层那个膜，然后照起来会有点亮亮。我又吃餐饭，像我昨天跟他们说，接手，最近开电商，
最近也
压力
是
太大，压力太大。
我知道我是这次是年会之后的那一个礼拜，但是我现在是
非常年轻，都没关系，很好吃的都没看。
很好的，我只看 IP。
我其实很想看这些东西，我忙太多活动，可是我下课晚上我看一下手机，就想到还有
我昨年会都听到我这边
我也是，
他会觉得很有罪恶感。
的确，
更乖一点。
不乖。
各位同学，在场的先生、女士大家好，我是佑格，这是那么今天非常荣幸邀请德国在台办事处的处长Dr. Jörg Polster 来这边做专题演讲。那么德国在台协会的这个处长其实就是德国驻台的大使，就像上次我们请斯洛伐尼亚驻台代表一样分享一下那么刚刚在这个12楼，我跟他聊了一下然后又带他到10楼的国际事务要长也谈了一下所以他今天主要要跟大家谈的议题是有关于这个全球化跟反全球化那么德国跟台湾那些项目题怎么来处理问题刚刚也提到这个有关于这2年来因为这个疫情的影响让整个全球化体系受到很大的冲击尤其是供应链的问题变得更大那他提了一个例子跟这个巨大就是生产这个最有名的自行车那么这个零组件供应链发生问题，有可能你今年订货到明年才会到这都是个大的一个全球化跟全球化覆盖的问题那么今天他的演讲他会用英文来跟大家报告，虽然他的中文也很好所以我刚刚所讲他都听得懂所以我就鼓励再翻译成英文来那么所以我想时间也很宝贵那我们现在就是热烈的欢迎这个Dr. Jörg Polster来跟我们做演讲来受一个错。
刚才错过。
Yeah, good morning. 我刚刚提到了我会讲英文，我很希望就是对我们来说没有这个问题。我来说当然比较轻松一点。我想说，如果你我说出来的就是你不懂的话，你们马上就听我问一个问题说，就是意思了解一下，这种比较快就放掉。Just also at the beginning, one more element. I do understand that what we discussed today is directly streamed on the internet. This limits to some extent what I can say today. So if there is anything going beyond the topic we have today and the Q&A at the end, we can discuss also other questions of interest to you. But then we should do this after we switch off the internet stream. Yeah, just that we are clear about that. Now, when we discussed coming to Danfrey and the speech here, of course, the interest was placed to talk about German-Taiwanese relations. Then we thought, okay, maybe we can enlarge the framework somewhat and look at some more fundamental issues at the same time. And so the topic we came up with is what you see on the screen here, which is putting the German-Taiwanese relationship in the context of globalization and maybe de-globalization. So when we look back just our bilateral relationship, Germany, Taiwan, then we can go back to the year of 1877, which is roughly 150 years ago, when we started to have relations. Of course, that is obvious, these are not static relations, but very dynamic, and they have evolved over those years. So we saw many changes, which are also related to changes in Germany, in Europe, in Asia, and Taiwan. With the question that is, where are we today, and maybe also where do we go from here? What is certainly important to say when we put those together, globalization and German-Taiwanese relation, then is to realize that both Taiwan and Germany have actually prospered over those decades of globalization, which was roughly the last 30 years. What we saw, which helped both of us, Taiwan and Germany, was a free flow of capital, of goods, of services, but also of people. Now the question is, this is what we adapted to in the past. Do we have to adapt to something different when we look ahead? Will there be a different framework? And this is why I put up this term of de-globalization at the same time. Let's see how this looks. What we have right now, we have had this now for 2 years, is a very special set of circumstances that we all battle with Corona and with COVID. Just to give you an example, how those 2 last years already affected our relations. When I came to Taiwan the summer of last year, I got a list from my colleagues in the office, which is a summary of all the visitors we had coming from Germany to Taiwan, and also Taiwanese visitors going to Germany, official visitors. And this is a long list with many, many names, and we're very happy to have this personal interchange. And this all stopped in March 2020. So roughly 2 years ago, we stopped having visitors. And until this week, until today, we had 0 visitors from Germany coming to Taiwan. There were a few, fortunately enough, a few Taiwanese official visitors going from Taiwan to Germany, but there were none for 2 years. And this is, of course, a very, very sad development. I'm happy to say that just now we have a German law professor in Taipei and also a German journalist. So these are the first visitors after the break of 2 years. At the same time, despite COVID, we still have a very successful economic development. We have a very successful trade relationship with Taiwan, Taiwan with Germany. This also went well during these COVID years. And we still have students coming from Germany to Taiwan, and also quite a number of Taiwan going to Germany. So that worked well, but as I said, this gap in terms of visitors was a very negative development. Now, when we look ahead, the question is, what do we see? And this is what I put here, saying the expectation was, until very recently, to say, once COVID is over, we will go back to what we had before COVID, what we had until 2019, which is globalization, and that means a resumption of globalization. Now, the question is this going to happen? Nobody can say for sure whether this is what we will see. Yeah, of course, the expectation is there. And I will a little later give you some examples why I say that the effects of globalization have been very successful for Germany as well as for Taiwan. But we have to take into consideration it's not necessary that we see a resumption of that development. I would say today this is still too early to tell when we look at all the factors and all the current developments, and there are quite many of them. But there are also different factors and different developments which may well tell us that we will see exactly the opposite of what we have been, of what we have had for the last 30 years, which then would be an element, a development of de-globalization. What I normally do in these kinds of circumstances, I go back in history and see whether there are examples of this kind of development in history, see whether we can learn from history to understand what may come in the future as well. So there is this famous quote from Mark Twain, who said at this time that history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. So of course it's impossible to look at historic processes and developments and say we will see exactly the same. This is not purpose, and I think this is not what we should expect. But as I said, it's still worthwhile to look back and see what happened earlier. Maybe it gives some guidance of where we are and what to expect for our own future. So when I did this, when I went back to so when I went back in history, I came across a period roughly 90 years ago when we saw a development similar to what we see today. We had a long phase of globalization at that time. And this globalization came to an abrupt end. I put here this quote of a source you can find on the internet, just also as a reference. Everything I put here are open source references. So you can look this up on the internet. You can find even more, of course, on the internet. I just take this as an illustration. So that research paper from the year 2002 did exactly what I proposed, looking back to the years of the 20s and 30s of the last century, going back 90 years, and analyzed what happened at that time. And as I said, the assessment is that 100 years ago, there was this era of global integration, as it is called. What I said before, you had a free flow of goods, services, people, capital, all this, what we also see today. And then there came the Great Depression in the US, and then also in many other places. And the globalization came to a stop. It ceased to continue. And what people then doing research in that field say, they would call it globalization backlash. So that happened at that time. Now, of course, the question is, what does it tell us for our own time? And how should we go forward? What should we expect when we look ahead? In very general terms, but also then, of course, Germany and Taiwan. This is where I would like to jump then to this particular element of Taiwanese-German relations. Just to give you a survey, an overview of how we deal with each other, what is important for both Taiwan and Germany. I said at the beginning, the origins you can find many years ago, roughly 150 years ago. So the first representation, if you like, of Germany in Taiwan was established in 1877 in Tainan, which at that time was a trade mission. So this is still in our memories how long our relationship goes back, and 150 years is quite some time. Then, of course, things started to move, and out of Tainan, the German government's representation office went to Taipei, and this is what you see on that slide. So I hope you can identify from that picture where the German consulate was. It goes back to 1895, as it says here. The building from a German architect, Mr. von Butler at this time. The first consul who came to Taiwan, Mr. Merz, Konstantin Merz, who was then followed as the second after him, Mr. Wilhelm Müller, who you can see on the slide here. who from 1897 to 1900 worked as the consul in Taipei. The building, as you see here, is in Dadaochang, which is on the banks of the river Damshu in Taipei. Unfortunately, the building as such is no more there, but the location is still there. So we have still the old photograph from that time. Today there is a junior high school, and my predecessor who worked here over quite a few years, he went to have this memory at the location of the former German consulate in Taiwan 120 years ago. So these are our memories going back many years. Of course, again, things have changed over time, as they always do. And this is where we are today. So the German representative office in Taipei is located today in the Yiling, in the Xini district. We are located on the 33rd floor in Yiling, and from there we organize our work. Also to put this in relation, our office here is one of many German foreign missions all over the world. Embassies, consulates are distributed, as you can see on that map. We have these offices in almost any place on Earth, just to be there and to help to structure our relationship with all those different countries. This means in numbers, 227 missions, out of which 152 embassies and consulate, multilateral offices like United Nations, like OECD, and many more. And then, of course, also our office here in Taipei. So this is basically where we are and how it looks like. What we offer, just also as a reference. When you want to see more and get more information, you can, of course, contact us directly. This is the website of ours you find on the internet with quite a number of information there. What you will not find there, and this is why I put this in another slide, just to give an idea of, for those of you who have not traveled to Germany before, just a little bit of a comparison in terms of size on the one side, population. Also then, what I always find interesting, the density of people per square kilometer in Taiwan, quite dense. Germany is a little less populated than Taiwan. And what, of course, is a very important difference as well, and this is why it's here on this slide as well, Taiwan an island, and Germany has 9 neighbors distributed around it, and this makes a big difference. And also, when you talk about relationships, definitely with neighbors, for us that means very special, of course, relationship in terms of trade, political relations, but then going down to energy, for instance. Yeah, maybe we come to that at a somewhat later point. So this is basically what we look at. Just to subscribe also to one maybe not so serious fact. My colleagues put in here as well. I think that situation is changing as well, but still, this is what becomes obvious when German visitors come to Taiwan, and most likely also Taiwanese go to Germany. Scooters versus cars. There is a very different approach to traffic in our both locations. 8th of December last year was the moment when we introduced our new government. We had the election September 21, and for us in Germany that meant that an era came to an end, because after 16 years under the leadership of Mrs. Merkel, our chancellor, since then we have a new Chancellor, Mr. Scholz. On the left here, on the right, our new Foreign Minister, Mrs. Baerbock, and in the middle, the German President, Mr. Steinmeier. This is the leadership of Germany going into 2022, and of course, immediately faced with quite a number of challenges, as you may know. Within that framework, maybe a few words on what we actually do, because this may be of interest also for further contacts and further cooperation. So within the framework of tasks the German Institute covers in Taiwan, you see a few elements which of course are rather normal. We try to understand what happens in Taiwan and inform our capital Berlin to let them know what is important in Taiwan, what is important for our presence in Taiwan, how relations should be structured. But that also goes as far as that we work together with our European colleagues, EU colleagues, to establish common positions and talk on that basis on the EU positions to the Taiwanese government. So this is one very general but very understandable element. As I said already, we have visitors from Germany, and hopefully we will have more when things get back to normal, both in Germany and Taiwan in terms of COVID, that we have delegations coming in to we have interlocutors here on the Taiwanese side, and vice versa. Taiwanese visitors go to Germany, talking to each other. This is one thing which we organize, which we do. We are very active also in terms of economic cooperation. There are many German companies here working together with Taiwanese companies, but there are also, and this may be of interest to you, quite a number of Taiwanese companies being present in Germany. So we help them to go through maybe some difficulties if need be, or they need some PR work. They have to talk to the government. All this is done by our office as well, which we do in cooperation with the other German institutions. Any question legal is also, of course, covered by the Institute. You may know that when you go to Europe, you don't need a visa anymore, as far as you go to the Schengen area. But when you go there, for instance, as a long-term student to study in Germany, or you have as a businessman, same thing, you have to stay longer, then you still need a visa, and this is what we do, what we process at the German Institute. We deal with emergencies for Germans here in Taiwan, and of course, we deal also with crisis prevention. Just for that latter element, just maybe to give an illustration, the first time I came to Taiwan was in August 1999, for just a few days. And then I went back to Germany, hoping to come back then to stay longer in early October 1999. What we certainly recall, what happened on the Joe 21st of September 1999 was the big earthquake, which brought quite some devastation to central Taiwan. And we helped at that time organizing technical experts from Germany who came here to look for victims, to help re-establish infrastructure. So this was part of our work as well, to help in this situation of crisis. So this is an overview, but I think I'm still missing some last elements on that side. So if you like, one element on these blue three small windows, this is what I do today, to try to bring across what is important in terms of German foreign policy and how to understand this from Taiwan. Bringing people together, cultural exchange is one element too. And here I would like to jump then to the next slide, because what we normally have, and we do have this in Taiwan as well, we are not alone. The German Institute is covering everything from politics to economics to cultural affairs. But we do have cooperation with quite a number of German institutions here as well. So I think another big one is the trade office, dealing with all the German companies in Taiwan. And we have one small office, TKAE, it's called. They collect economic information and put it back to Germany in order to inform German entrepreneurs of how to do business in Taiwan. So this is the economic part of it. And then we have, of course, also 3 cultural institutions. In the middle, you see Goethe Institute. They offer classes in German language, but they also organize any kind of cultural exchange, bringing artists to Germany, and many more. They are supplemented by an office of the DAAD. DAAD is the Students Exchange Office. So we have one office helping Taiwanese students to find the right place for further studies in Germany, but also if there's an interest of German students coming to Taiwan in order to study Chinese or whatever other topic they may find in Taiwan. And then we have one more, the TES is the Taipei European School. We have a school on the Yangmingshan, where we have a British, a French, but also a German branch of that school, which is always important. When you have expats in another country, then their children, of course, would like to attend school, and the German school here offers exactly that opportunity. So we are working together with these different German institutions, each of us going in his direction or her direction, so we can cover as many topics as possible to foster the overall relationship between Germany and Taiwan. Now, what may be of particular interest to you, and this is where I would like to start with when we look at different sectors, education and research. We do have, as of the time being, 300 cooperations between universities on both sides, German on the one side, Taiwanese on the other side. And then you can see the figures. There's quite a number of German students here in Taiwan, and vice versa, a number of Taiwanese students in Germany to study. We have German departments at universities, as for instance here at Danjiang Daishe. We have also German universities focusing on Taiwan. There is quite a number of research also coordinated between the German Ministry and MOST here in the Ministry of Science and Technology in Taiwan. So this is going very well, and we of course hope that we, at the end of COVID, that have more chances to do something more and to enlarge that cooperation. What of course is always the focus, this is how we structure our trade and economic relations, in particular investment. And what is important to know, that given the development in Taiwan on the economic front, as well as Germany, that we have two economies which actually complement each other. So when we look at the structure, and I showed this to you in a moment, we'll see what I mean by that. Just to give you as an introduction, this is Taiwan Imports. You see we have a small share of 3% out of those imports, and when you look at the different sectors, electronics, machinery, this is the main part, but also chemicals as an important contribution to the electronics and chip sector in Taiwan. I have this a little bit in a different format here. Exactly, this is the bilateral trade structure. So you can realize what we do, what comes from Germany to Taiwan, but also what goes from Taiwan to Germany. There is no surprise. This is the same with any other export market for Taiwan. The main components are electronic ones and ICT. Yeah, both going beyond 1/3. Machinery, transportation is another big part of the exports. What's coming in from Germany, machinery, chemicals, as I said before, also transportation. And this is what I mean, the two economies do complement each other. So there's a huge interest and many possibilities to work together. There is no real dependence on each other, but actually a lot of potential for further growth. When you look on the timeline, we just celebrated last year as a very particular one, because for us that meant that we went through the mark of 20 billion US in terms of trade, the overall trade, export and imports combined. Quite an increase over the previous years, and of course this is something we would like to build on as a very positive trend. But just to put this into perspective, I know you are aware of those figures yourself. So for us, bilateral trade 20 billion. When you compare this with the Taiwanese-Chinese trade, then you end up with 300 billion US. Yeah? So this is a factor 10 more than what we have between Germany and Taiwan. It hasn't changed much over time, so this is also quite interesting. There are our main parts, main elements which we bring in to Taiwan: chemicals, automobiles, machinery. Did not change over the last 20 years. Yeah, of course somewhat, but you see those different graphs. Very stable development starting in 2000 until 2020, which is a pretty positive sign also going into the future. Very last one on the economic part here, because I found it very interesting to see. This is not yet. Yeah, this one. What you see on that slide is basically trade, and for us it's export from Germany to Taiwan, calculated on the basis per capita. And when we do this per capita, we realize that Taiwan is the most important export market for Germany in Asia, the whole of Asia, coming before South Korea, but also Japan, China, and many other countries. Yeah, this is important to keep in mind when we look at the per capita export out of Germany into Asia. Taiwan is number one. This is a very positive result, and this, of course, always a challenge for us to keep it up in the future as well. One last word on this one. Of course, this is always a very close relationship in terms of the political relations we have within the German Bundestag, German Parliament. We do have a friendship group, and it was just organized again after the election we had in 2021. So now for 30 years, we have this friendship group, and members of that group come to Taiwan very regularly, looking into all these different areas and helping to foster the relationship we have. Something very positive for us, having the support in the German Parliament. Okay, last but not least, on the bilateral relations, just for those of you who have an interest in German language, this is one thing we can do in German language, which I think it's not so often that you can find that. This is the longest German words, which has 67 letters to it. Just to give you an idea of what it actually means, this is the translation into English. So it does make sense, this very long word. We can play with the German language. I think that same way you calculate with the Chinese value. Now, and going back to the original topic, and keep in mind how those German-Taiwan relations have developed over time, I would come back to this element of globalization and de-globalization. Yeah, basically all of what I described in the bilateral relationship rests as of today in modern times on that opening up on this globalization process we have seen for 30 years. Now, when we look at it a little closer today, we see a number of obstacles coming up. And I put a few of them on that slide, which of course are not, this is not a comprehensive list of obstacles, but there are some major ones. Supply chains, I think we mentioned it at the very beginning. We have this one example. There are many, many more, which is a very big topic and a very difficult one. So this is what we face today, interruption of supply chains, and we have to see where we go from here. Will we be able to repair the supply chains, maybe to restructure them? This is all up to us right now. This is a challenge we see. Then on the financial front, we see a few elements coming as well, yeah, which is very hotly debated in Taiwan, of course, as it is in Germany. Is anything related to inflation? Prices go up, and enterprises, governments, but also every Taiwanese and every German have to adjust and see what to do about his personal life facing increasing inflation. But finances is a lot more. What you see, of course, are rising interest rates, which do change the framework for doing business. Within that context, you have tariffs which come back. Tariffs are rising in many places, and you have something which is called a different type of trade obstacle, standard setting, non-tariff obstacle to that. Standard setting, from the original, very much internationalized standards, coming into a direction of more national standards, which have a huge impact on any enterprise doing international business. COVID, of course, I mentioned that before, and then you have an element of reshoring. Yeah? I show you a little bit of an illustration as we move forward. And of course, you could add here any kind of military conflict as we see them now in Eastern Europe. So we see those obstacles growing. The question is, will we be able to contain this development, or will this just keep growing? What is important in this context is to take a little bit a look also at pretty fundamental developments which have an influence on those factors we see on that slide. One of the most fundamental factors, in my opinion, is this one. You see, and this is for the whole globe. This is for everybody together. Those are consolidated figures from the IMF. You find those on the internet. You find even a lot more of this. Just put this as an example. This is consolidated debt of all those different elements. Total, of course, what we see here aggregated, and we see this coming from 1970 to here. This is 50 years. Debt has increased considerably over those 50 years, and those last 2 years, COVID-19 in particular, contributed to the increase of debt. So this is something very important to keep in mind, how financial conditions have changed already and will change in future as well, which will have an impact on that development. Do we see globalization or do we see more de-globalization? So finances, that one element. Another one, as I said before, is anything related to energy. You may be aware that energy prices exploded starting in autumn 21, basically. Already before then, but then it really went up considerably. Now what you see here is basically crude oil production. And it may seem just a small change at the right end of this slide, where you have this setback, and you have a considerable decrease of oil production. You have just to put your attention on the left side, this is million barrels per day. Yeah? So that slight change on the right side is actually a big change in overall oil production. Of course, we had a certain limited growth or even degrowth during those 2 years of Corona. But when we go forward in time, the demand for oil will increase. The question, can production meet that demand? So energy production, energy demand, but then also energy prices will be very important when we go ahead, as well as I said, for this relationship between globalization and de-globalization. What is as well important, that would be next slide, from the same source. As I say, you'll find those on the internet. Mr. Berger here also then with a graph on food prices. Food prices, again, like energy, explode. When you see how much they did aggregated until very recently, I think they keep increasing. So this is a headache for many countries all over the world. Energy, food prices go up. And again, this has an impact on where we go in terms of globalization versus de-globalization. Just one additional remark for illustration on the reshoring, or you can also call it onshoring. This is a process we may see going into the future, and of course, which is then difficult when we see more of that process, onshoring, difficult to imagine that globalization continues. Yeah? The more onshoring you have, the less globalization you will see. And I just chose a quote from Mrs. Yellen, the Treasury Secretary of the United States, and see what she has in mind in terms of onshoring. You find quotations from other politicians all over the world. This is a tendency which is developed, which comes to us, and which may make it very difficult to continue with globalization. Yeah? So this is something to keep in mind, and we will see more of this in the future. So the question then is, of course, when we see these obstacles coming up, pointing maybe in the direction of more deglobalization, what are the conclusions? Yeah, what should we do in this kind of environment? And again, I would always argue in favor of do some long-term planning, both on the personal side, but also in terms of government policies, to have a very clear understanding what will happen short-term, what will happen mid-term, what will happen long-term. And given these uncertainties we see on the global scale, which then translate in uncertainties also for very much local conditions, like Taiwan, like Germany, I think it pays to be as flexible as possible and prepare for any outcome. Yeah, you may not know today how the world will look like tomorrow, so it's very much advised to be flexible and to prepare in different directions. Not just to have a plan E, but also to have a plan B and a plan C. So these would be my conclusions of what we see as of today. Coming out of this globalization process, seeing a rising number of obstacles for globalization, and maybe a change of trend towards deglobalization, which then the question is, what does it mean for Germany and for Taiwan? Yeah? as for the time being, so I put together assessments of how they look at this is end of April. Yeah, at that point, the assessment still was German economy is resilient. Going forward, there are problems. Supply chains are named here, but still inflation. Yeah, but still economy as a whole is being named resilient at that time. Same thing then when we look at the Taiwanese economy, also end of April. What happens? Taiwan Institute of Economic Research with an assessment saying we would expect, despite all these uncertainties, despite the impact of what we see coming out of the military conflict in Eastern Europe, Taiwan economy will grow by 4% also in 22. Pretty optimistic statement here. Yeah, so all this is current, this is all as of now. And then, of course, we have some less optimistic assessment. This is what the IMF says. They speak of a stagflationary environment, which would, of course, make it very difficult to expect a rapid growth in GDP for many, many countries and places. Inflation is named, food prices, fuel prices. This is what I showed you before. This is going to happen. This we see already happen. Again, the question is, what will be the midterm and long-term effects of that development? Yeah, and yeah, you see it. You see at the very end here also the focus on the high debt. This is why I showed you the slide before. High debt is detrimental to a strong economic growth. In Germany, we have already a discussion on this. Yeah, what is the outcome? What does it look like? Where do we go? What should we prepare for? What I put together, this is in German language. I translated immediately. This comes from of the leading economic newspapers we have in Germany, from the Handelsblatt, where an economist argues in favor of Germany needs urgently a strategy for a de-globalized global economy. Yeah? So you have already an assessment. This is beginning of April, so this is also new, yeah? Saying we see a process going into de-globalization, and we have to prepare for that development. The same came out of the visit. This is a media report on the visit of our Chancellor, Mr. Scholz, who went to Japan the other day, just a few days ago. And in the framework of his visit, Mr. Scholz's visit to Japan, he came back and said, I warn against decoupling of global economy as a consequence of the war in Ukraine. This is what basically says here. And he is very clear, the deglobalization is for a trade nation, open and free trade nation like Germany, like Japan. And you could easily include also Taiwan, because it's the same way of thinking. This is no option for us. So these are already statements saying we see that development towards a deglobalized global economy. It's not an option for us. What can we do? How should we deal with that? So that will be very important when we talk about the future German-Taiwanese relations, to take this into consideration and say things may become somewhat more difficult than it used to be. We had a very successful cooperation over the last 30 years, and we need to look very carefully what will be the important elements as we go into the future and how we structure our being together. And for that reason, I do hope very much that we have an opening of Germany, of Taiwan, that Corona is being put behind, and we discuss it then through the visits we will have and say how do we move forward to strengthen the Taiwanese economy, the German economy, and help our two peoples to prosper. So that is hopefully the outcome, to face a threat of deglobalization, but to find a way to deal with it. We will see what the outcome will be. Yeah? This is all happening as of today, and this is why I put together those two elements, German-Taiwanese relationship on the one side, but then as a second element in the context of those potential changes from globalization towards deglobalization. So that would be all what I have to say today. And I'm happy, of course, now to discuss with you, take your questions, and hopefully find a good answer to your questions.
感谢这个 Dr. Jörg Polster 的演讲哈。那么现在是不是开放现场观众来提问题哦？请同学不要客气哈。你用中文、英文那都可以通哈。如果你用德文也可以哈。来，请。
Do you think that China-EU comprehensive agreement on investment will influence the trading or diplomatic policies of Germany towards Taiwan?
First, we have to see where we go with this agreement. Yeah? Of course, this is being prepared, and we still don't know where it will go. Yeah? This is, for the time being, it's stalled. It has to be taken on again and discussed again. European Parliament has to say what it thinks of it. The European Commission. So this is still a little early to think about that agreement coming into force and then having implications. For me, this is part of the overall development, to see a number of those international agreements being discussed. And Taiwan is very interested in taking part in that discussion. Yeah, you have this CPTPP agreement being developed further as well. You have the RCEP, with another big agreement with the focus on Asia. So we will see quite a number of those. And as for Taiwan in particular, there is of course always the idea, and we discuss this quite often with the Taiwanese government, and we discuss it also back with our capitals, to have negotiations on a trade agreement between the EU. The EU is now in charge of trade in Europe. It's not more the single member state, it's the EU in Brussels, negotiating a trade agreement between Brussels for the EU and Taiwan on the other side. So that is something which is on the table, and I do hope that we make progress with these negotiations as well. If indeed that agreement which you talked about will go into effect, then it will of course not just influence, have an impact on European-Chinese relationship, it will by definition have an impact on everybody else as well. That would include Taiwan. And for that reason, I think it's so interesting for Taiwan, and we have these discussions to say, what could the Taiwanese government do in order to enlarge its international economic standing? And I'm pretty optimistic that we find a solution for that particular relationship, EU/Germany and Taiwan on the other side.
好，来，请。
Good afternoon, Professor. I have one simple question. If the war between Taiwan and China really happened, well, what would Germany do, or what would EU do? Thank you.
I'm very much in favor of not having this development, and I would ask everybody involved to work towards the goal of not having this. I find it actually the only conceivable approach to avoid this by all means. Yeah? I have my own experiences with war, civil war in this sense, during my own career. And I saw the outcome of this. This is no option. Yeah? If there's any chance to avoid this, you avoid it. You may see, and as when I watch Taiwan news on the TV channels, yeah, you have these pictures from Ukraine coming in. Look very carefully. War is no reasonable outcome. So before we talk about what might happen when, my first and direct answer is don't go for war. This is no solution. Whatever may be done to avoid war, just do it. I know it seems to be very simple and maybe oversimplified. I'm aware of that. But that would be my first approach to say, what can we do to avoid that development? This is devastating. And you cannot imagine the consequences right now. This is beyond imagination. So this should not be the outcome. Yeah? Whatever can be done to avoid that should be the very first approach. And I think there are still many possibilities to go that direction of not having any kind of confrontation.
Achieve.
Guten Tag. I have a simple question. Because the reason they put in the state is still want to state denazification for Bucharest. Because we know that your country, Germany, has a very complex history about the Nazi. So I want to know about what is your position about Buddhist speech.
I think this is being discussed on many channels. That would be a topic I talk to you bilaterally. When we're done with Q&A, I discuss this with you on a bilateral basis.
好，那么等一下如果有时间哦，那么再跟你私底下沟通哈。这个问题因为比较敏感一点哈。好，来，是不是？哎，请，那个后面那位同学，请。
Mr. Pastor, I have a question. I would like to know what's your opinion on Germany's energy politics in the future?
Another hot topic. Germany has put a lot of emphasis on something we call Energiewende, which is energy transition in English. To move away from the traditional energy sources to renewables. Solar, wind, but a few more, of course. And this is a process which is ongoing. Now, of course, while this went rather smoothly for many years, the developments starting in 21 with very strongly increasing energy prices started a discussion in Germany, but also in many other places. Yeah, it's all over Europe. It's being discussed and say, what do we do? What is the strategy? We have the long-term goal of going for renewables. What kind of adjustments do we need short-term to face these obstacles? And of course, coming out of the situation in Eastern Europe, Ukraine, Russia, the imports of oil and gas. Question is how to put this together. So, when you had asked me a year ago, my answer would be very simple. Yeah, we just move ahead with this energy transition. things started to change with this huge increase in prices at the end of last year. And it started again to change with the development of the euro. So we have one change after the other. As of now, I think there is, of course, a very strong will to keep going with an even more rapid transition towards renewables. At the same time, we have a discussion in Germany, not only but also in Germany, to say what else maybe we have to do. As for the German industry, for instance, they have built all their business plans on an energy mix, which includes oil and gas. So you cannot just overnight switch this off. So the discussion between business community and government say, look, we have to find a solution how to proceed in a smooth way of transiting towards the energy in terms of renewables. This discussion is indeed ongoing. This is now. There is no final solution to this. And then you maybe know there's even an additional element which makes it even more difficult. Germany has decided clearly, and this was in the context of Fukushima, 2011, say we would like to switch off nuclear power. And we stick to that decision. But now you have, within the framework of the EU, a decision to say, they looked at all the energy sources, and with regard to nuclear power, they said, okay, we consider this to be sustainable, and we would like to develop nuclear further. So there is a certain element of difficulty between what's happening on the EU level and what's happening on the German government level. It has to be sorted out. It will be sorted out. Yeah? There's one big discussion now on energy. I can't predict the outcome of this. I have a certain idea what measures we take and where we go, but it's shifting to a high degree very quickly right now. And I think we need some patience to see the outcome of this. So I have to postpone a final answer to this until we settle ourselves in Germany, in the EU, to say this is how we move forward, given the circumstances right now. Yeah? High prices, oil, gas, etc., coal, import or no more imports as we decided from Russia. How to make this a new stable environment in terms of energy in future. It's just happening. So when you give this assessment, anything else would be speculation. We have to see how things develop in Germany.
对，刚刚这边还有一位同学要问问题啊，来这边啊，爸，不好意思。
Good morning. I was just wondering, kind of in the context of the conflict with Ukraine, kind of how quickly, if at all, kind of should Germany move towards reducing dependency on Russian oil and gas, and kind of what will the eventual objective look like? Is it kind of reducing to no imports at all, or is it kind of somewhere in between nothing and what it is now?
As I said, this is just happening. Yeah, I think if I'm not mistaken, within those different packages of sanctions, coal was already included, so that would be off the table. But then, when it comes to oil and gas, you have different opinions already in one society, as for instance the German society, and you have different opinions when it comes to within the framework of the EU. Yeah? And this is just now, when you look at the news of today, you see these different opinions. Yeah? To say, do we phase out, do we switch off immediately, do we phase out over time? This is indeed being discussed, and there are many opinions. Yeah? As I said, between different member states of the EU, and then even in the German society as well. Yeah? People who need gas for heating, businesses who need gas for their production processes. Yeah? So if you say we switch this off, you need an alternative. Yeah. So we have to make sure we have an alternative and then how to proceed. Yeah. So this is all being discussed and make it as quick as possible, but also as smooth as necessary. Yeah. So discussions, and these are not easy discussions. Yeah. Energy is fundamental for everything, and when you look at those discussions outside of that particular framework, Ukraine and Russia, yeah? When you look long term, you see energy is directly related to GDP growth. Yeah? So this is a very, maybe also oversimplified statement, but say you make energy cheap and you may have a strong economic development. You make energy expensive and we have a very less strong economic development. Very simple relationship, again, maybe oversimplified, but basically that. Yeah? So all these considerations have to go into the discussion. Say, what do we want? What can we get? What is realistic to do? This is being done right now, but this is happening. I can't jump to a conclusion as of today. It would be too early for that. Yeah? But it's one of the fundamental discussions in the
OK， 好，那这边是不是在？好，哦，还有什么？这边还有什么问题要提出来？好，请。
Guten Morgen, Schulz. I have a question about the stance of German Chancellor Scholz the Germany, because a week or two prior, he stated that Germany will have closer ties with countries in Indo-Pacific, specifically those who share the same value as Germany. And I wonder what that means for Taiwan in the case of Taiwan and Chinese relations. How will they help or, I don't know, strengthen the cooperation between these countries?
Indeed, for us, Germany, Taiwan is a partner also in those values. Yeah? Democracy, peaceful transition of power, different party system, many elements, but say we are very close. Yeah? Energy is another one, climate, you name it. There's many values we say pretty much they're very close to each other. Now, the German government came into power early December last year and saying we would have, this was your statement at the very beginning, saying we would like to look at our policies, global scales, within that global scale. Indo-Pacific is one important element. We have a strategy on the Indo-Pacific, so we would like to focus on that region. And that would, of course, include that to say we look at within that framework, to look at policies with countries like China, like Japan, ASEAN, and that would include Taiwan as well. This is being developed. How to say, what do we do? Yeah? It goes somewhat slower than we would have expected, but I think a lot of attention is now taken towards Eastern Europe. Yeah? But still, the discussions going on and say, how do we structure this in future? Yeah? It's going step by step, and we wait for the outcome here to implement what is being decided. So it's a little early also for that question to give you a precise answer, but there are a lot of ideas on the table. Say, what can we do? Yeah, in order to foster that exactly along the lines of those joint values which we have. So, yeah? But one important element is, and this is of course without saying, we need more contacts again. People talking to each other from all sectors, German society, American society. That would be still my very first approach to say, we have to talk to each other. Yeah? It doesn't make sense to structure your policy if you do not have people to implement, walk to each other, to make this happen. Yeah? So I'm very much in favor now of opening up and having guests again and meetings and say, what do we expect? What do we want? Taiwan, Germany. Yeah? And put this into our new ideas, but it's still being discussed. It's not final. We go over.
OK， 好，那个这边有没有什么要问题？还是玉兴呢？李轩要问问题？还有博士班的学长，那机会难得那个 Jörg Polster 今天能够来跟大家谈，在全球化下跟去全球化下，台湾跟德国的关系各有各种面向的讨论。首先要不要问问题？来，请后面有位同学，先听吧，请。
Good morning, Dr. Polster. Actually, when you mentioned about Germany trying to de-globalize or decouple from the economy, how easy is it for Germany to achieve this target? And second, when you mean by the globalization or decoupling, does it mean that Germany tends to decouple completely from the global economy, or it's just a selective partnership? These are my questions. Thank you.
Actually, it is not the target, it's the opposite. Yeah? The idea is, as I try to convey, is say Germany as well as Taiwan, and certainly many others as well, but in particular Taiwan and Germany. We have had many positive consequences out of globalization. So for us, and this is the two statements from the economists and from the chancellor himself, Mr. Scholz, is actually to say we would like to keep going with globalization. And I understand Taiwan is pretty much in favor of the very same approach. Say yes, we could keep going with globalization. But it may not be us to decide whether this can happen. So the point is to say, in case we would have to face a change of this trend towards deglobalization and more national approaches, how do we cope? What do we do about it? Not that we want it, but maybe we have to be part of that. Because it's not just up to us to say we want globalization, and then everybody says, yes, of course, we keep doing globalization. So, if possible, we keep going in this direction, more exchange, more openness, and definitely with Taiwan. Well, when we both want to do it, we can do a lot of things together bilaterally. But of course, globalization is a much broader approach, and if possible, yes. But if not possible, then the question is what to do about it. Not that we want it, but maybe this is not our choice to do. And then that's what I put down, these obstacles coming up. Say, if these obstacles grow in power and size, what do we do about it? That we still can interact. To give you an example on the electronic sector, chips. Europe now has a law coming out of Brussels to say we would have a special fund for fostering semiconductor development in Europe. Now you can say, okay, this is this kind of deglobalization. Of course, we do it now in Europe. We can rely on Taiwan, but why do we do this in Europe? Still, this is not a contradiction in itself. Saying, for us, this is actually an added value. We still rely on Taiwanese semiconductors, but still we have some competence again also in Europe. And quite a number of Taiwanese companies say the very same. Say we have to be close to the consumer, which Europe is part of. So it doesn't have to be a contradiction. It can very well be an added layer of mutual gains. So it's always to think what happens, and again, can we turn it into still an element of openness and not closing down? borders, regulations and tariffs and so on. So just to be clear about it, for us, and I guess also for Taiwan, the best thing would be to keep going with globalization. Just that we have to be prepared. Yeah, this is why I put these in. Yeah? Sometimes things go against your interests, and then you still have to find a way to cope with them.
OK， 感谢Jörg Polster 的回应哦。再来还有两位同学或是跟他主要回应哦，除了宪兵之外哦，还有其他的。请 Mark。
Just on the reshoring of supply chains question, I was just kind of wondering how kind of optimistic you are from kind of that it can be done in Europe. Because I know I think TSMC tried to kind of shift production to Texas, and they were kind of having problems with Texas employment law being kind of too strict because they needed kind of 24/7 kind of just-in-time production. And I think kind of apart from Europe, kind of Japan has also been talked about, but it's possibly quite difficult to transfer production because of the different kind of labour environments.
Not the real expert in semiconductors, but I have a certain idea. We have talked to the organization here for the semiconductors, the CME and different enterprises. Going beyond TSMC, there are many, this is Taiwan, this is electronics everywhere. This is actually an example why we should have even more globalization instead of reshoring. Because when you look at, and this has been growing naturally. This is a result not of a one-off policy decision. This is a result of a development 20 years, 25, yeah, at least. Boris Chan coming back. But again, everybody else. Because when you look very carefully and look at the details, this is a huge ecosystem. Many factors going into infrastructure, yeah? Power, water, and that power 24/7 on cable, yeah? This kind of thing. Manpower, talent, yeah? Engineers. So then if you look at one enterprise, you have to look beyond because there are many more. Yeah. I happen to know that we have a German chemical industry in Taiwan as well. They are crucial for the semiconductor industry. And you find many more. So and the supply chain is actually huge. Yeah. So I think onshoring is a strategy. This is why I put this on this slide. The question is to what extent will it be successful? Because those supply chains are so extremely complicated. They have grown over decades. And so now we change them. At least what you would expect is a huge increase in prices. Because normally when supply chains build up, as I say, naturally, yeah, the invisible hand, they do this cost efficiency. Who can contribute what in terms of high-tech, low-tech, raw materials, yeah, many elements. When you restructure this, you will end up with a higher price. Again, what I put there as an obstacle is inflation. Inflation means less disposable income for everybody. And then at the same time, we want to increase prices. Yeah. We will see what the outcome will be, but what we may get is another disruption. It will certainly not be that easy to do. Yeah. We will see. Again, this is all. Like we have this energy with all the other. This is life. This is as we speak. This is not settled. Yeah. Always when you go from a from a stable environment, the next stable environment goes through a period of instability. And then you can only hope that you make the best decisions to reach the next stable environment without any interruptions.
好，感谢这个同学提问题啊。那个高先生刚提问，要不要对一下哈？
再听一下。
好，再听一下。好，现在是在 Q&A 时间了。好，还有没有同学问问题？好，这个机会难得哈。那么在场还有没有？OK， 请 please.
So on the topic of energy policy, there has been a hot topic in Taiwan now. The government is shutting down nuclear power plants and would like to build new gas. Would like to build new gas receiver stations that would potentially harm the environment. I think we are going through a struggle concerning power stability, and it's not comparable to the struggle in Germany. And what do you think? Should we opt for a more stable electricity energy supply, or should we slowly transition to a safer energy solution, even though there aren't any that are really stable in the moment? Thank you.
I do understand that this is a pretty hot topic as well, and we already have hot topics here today. As it is a very hot topic, yeah, this is for sure. Energy is, as I said, one of the fundamental elements of society. And one additional factor which we should not forget about is when you take decisions on energy supply, they have all long-term effects. A decision you take today will come to fruition only over many years. It takes time to build a power plant, whatever it is. It takes time to build the infrastructure for the power plant. Yeah? So you have to already think ahead into the future and say, how does the environment look like? How do prices look like in the future? Yeah? Inflation now is a big element. Yeah? I just saw now speak about 3.3% in Taiwan, but when you look at certain elements of the inflation, yeah, as for instance construction material, are very expensive. So whatever you plan for the future should have these elements in mind. But what is then an additional element to make things a little bit more complicated is what we call energy security. I recall an article in the South China Morning Post of maybe 2 weeks ago, where the discussion was Taiwan energy security, saying, okay, there is a certain number of days where you have oil reserve, and there's a certain number of days where you have gas reserves. That's limited. Yeah? So energy security, yeah, no longer supply gas in case of interruption. These kind of things go into that equation as well. So price, energy security, a very interesting, important topic today is CO2 as well. So we have many, many elements. And you have then, of course, on the other side, you have people, you have the industry saying we need stable supply 24/7. So what do we do? Yeah? And for that reason, there is this very fundamental discussion on what is the best solution. We do have, as the German government, as the Taiwanese government, annual meeting on energy dialogue, where we discuss these issues. Say, what do we do in Germany? What do we do in Taiwan? What can we learn from each other? there is no quick fix. I think this is difficult to foresee. I certainly have a few ideas of what comes to my mind, but we will certainly then have this meeting to discuss those elements. But it is, of course, for very good reason, this is what the Taiwanese government is discussing, preparing, and deciding. Just one maybe additional remark here. I was very surprised to see that within those 4 referenda in December last year, there were 2 related to energy, important topics. And still, there was so little participation in those referenda. I was surprised to think, as you just said, important, where did we go? But there were not so many people going to the polls in order to have their vote counted, also for these 2 referenda on energy. So, maybe this is going to change.
OK， 好，这个，这是
Good morning, Professor. As we all know, Germany has always taken a very friendly position towards refugees issues. So, especially recently, over the millions of refugees has been flown into Germany from Ukraine. So I'm curious about how the German society is dealing with the issue, or how they get used to the policy. Thank you.
Yes, you may know that we started taking on quite a number of refugees already in the year 2015. And at the beginning, this was quite controversial and being discussed and say, yeah, how does it work? And it's still being discussed. Now, the refugees coming out of the Ukraine, and they go to many different places, but they also go to Germany. Yeah, this is out of this history of the last 7 years. This is a lot easier than it would have been otherwise. So there are structures in place to receive those refugees and to put them in the right place and support them in terms of shelter, food, communication. Schooling for the children, healthcare, all of those. This is actually flowing very smoothly. Yeah, out of this development we have had since 2015. Yeah? I think this is a lot easier than one would have imagined otherwise.
OK， 一心要问什么问题？
我最后一个。
啊？
我最后一个也可以用中文。
代
表的中文很好，就是说，其实刚刚代表有讲到关于台湾跟德国的双边关系。那其实因为台湾在一个国际舞台上的一个立场，其实我们大家都知道。那以说德国这边的一个代表自己觉得说，台湾在未来在这个国际的一个promote， 或者说怎么去如何推动，让台湾去可以更有力的去站在这个国际舞台上去展现说台湾人的一个力量，就是说除了在经济方面之外。
Yes, economy is of course only one element. There's always this question of soft power. Yeah, but actually, there are also many elements that when we talk about soft power outside of the economic sector. And Taiwan is very active, say, but we should have an active participation in the international organization to the extent that we have an added value to bring to the table and discuss issues. And we talk to the Taiwanese government saying, what can we do about it to make this reasonable participation possible? Yeah, so this is happening for one. This is the official side. But then the soft power, of course, is a lot on the personal level. And that may come as a surprise, but out of this corona development, many people, for instance, in Germany, but I think it's not just Germany, there are many more, realized and learned about Taiwan, realized what Taiwan is, what Taiwan can do, because of this very successful dealing with corona. This was definitely in Germany an eye-opener for many people. Say, oh, Taiwan, what happens? Yeah, and we have these issues, and Taiwan is doing so well. What is different in Taiwan? So this was, in terms of the soft power, this was indeed an element that people got aware of Taiwan much more than before. Yeah? So I think these are the interesting elements. I went to the Academia Sinica. We discussed what kind of cooperation can we do now as we come out of Corona. Yeah, vaccination is one element, treatment, databases. So there's still a lot more which can be done. Yeah, but to reach the broad population in Germany, actually this policy of Taiwan on Corona, starting in spring 2020, yeah, was a big success. Yeah? So this is what we have. Indeed, I do think economy is just one element, but culture, yeah, is much more, yeah, to reach the hearts of people. Definitely. Yeah, and I think a lot of is happening on this, and I count now on this opening after Corona. We have this people-to-people exchanges, yeah, which contribute a lot to shaping that picture.
OK， 好，如果没有问题的话，最后 May I ask one question?
Just would like to make one element, if you allow. To all the questions you put on the table, and one we have to take up anyway, but everything else as well. My comments go somewhat general. Again, as we do this over the internet, yeah, if there is an interest still to discuss these questions further, I'm very happy to do so. Yeah, but then we do it bilaterally. Yeah, because on all these issues, a lot more is to be said. But then we have to have a different framework for that. So just let me know when we find a framework to discuss it.
好，因为那个德国在台代表处是在101啊，如果各位还有什么问题，还可以再问他哦。那么，因为今天这个代表所谈的问题是全球化与反全球化德国跟台湾的关系，然后他也提出很多很有智慧的中文比如说无常，那无常多了就变成有常，就变成常态无就是变化。那他也提出人无远虑，必有近忧我现在讲他都知道也就是我们要有一个这个 short 的 middle 跟 long term plan to prepare every outcome or every possible， 个人都要这样的思考所以我觉得他今天这个演讲不仅提供给我们一些非常重要的一个基本资料那么全球化、本球化的一些影响，然后也提出台湾跟德国可以更进一步发展的问题那么因为刚刚也提到很多有关于台湾跟德国在整个印太、亚太面临很多问题不管是 CPTPP、RCEP 那么这就是未来对这个两边参与全球化跟本球化的一个挑战所以我想问他一个问题，就是I like to ask one short question in the answer in short. That is, what is the German's position on the US leading Indo-Pacific economic framework? And under this IPEF, what should Taiwan and Germany to collaborate under this framework?
I have to admit that I'm aware of the framework, but I'm not aware of the conditions, meaning what's the fine print of it. Let's say we have an additional framework put on the table right now, when you have already a number of other frameworks. So the CPTP is already one, yeah, where we have an express Taiwanese interest of participation. And then we have RCEP as well, yeah. Okay, my understanding is that, but I may be wrong. I'm not an expert on RCEP, but what I learned about it is that the drive for RCEP was very much coming from ASEAN in the first place, yeah. All of those already existing agreements or frameworks they will continue to develop. And I was told that as for RCEP, they even have their own secretariat, which is we have a structure attached to RCEP, which has the intention to develop it further. Yeah. So you will not just stick to the rules agreed so far. You will have development over time. And now my question is, when I have these existing frameworks, how does the additional one goes into that balance, into the equilibrium? Say, yeah, what is changing? Yeah, what is the added value of the new one? Yeah, and how does it interact with the existing ones? Yeah, this I would like to understand and see what is coming up, because I can't say is this so to say also mutually supportive, or is it more a competing framework? Yeah, as far as I can tell today, I have not so many information to tell how they will interact, but that I think would be important, yeah, because participants in the other frameworks already focus and they really develop those. Now we have a new one. How is the interaction there? But we will see. This has to be discussed.
对啊，我问的问题其实是在强调说，因为美国所领导的这个 IPF 基本上就是某种程度是排除中国在外了。那 RCEP 的或是 CPTPP 基本上中国那么印太太平洋都会参加这是另外一个economic framework 的一个思考点那我想因为时间差不多了那么今天感谢这个Jörg Polster 的演讲让我们学到很多，尤其在场有11个问题提出来这不容易因为在场演讲当中大家能够这么平心静气的搞下来做一个学术的对话思想沟通，这个不容易那基本上体现出来说Jörg Polster 是一个非常典型的德国的学者专家跟你讨论对话那么跟你强调问题的本质，然后了解本质之后才能够继续讨论下去的一个结果那我们准备一个小东西送给这个Jörg Polster第三。
在大合照。好，那最后我们再一张大合照，麻烦大家就是移动一下脚步到我们台前来这里。对。
如果有兴趣的同学来前面，跟在刚刚下。
好。对，那我们把握时间，如果有想要问问题的，我们等一下会开放给大家，再稍微问一下这样子。对，好，我们移动一下，一起，这个问题。等下，我们等下就 OK 好，大家来，朋友，我们集中一下。
愿意来同学就来这样下面你都可以在我们网页上面登录下来。
好。
对，没有跟他打招呼。
好，一起，来。
我再放。按着叫放。
我们集中托高一下好不好？集中，再集中一下，那个不要超过桌子。对，我们在里面。不要客气，躺着坐着都可以，只要看得到你的脸，好不好？这里可以坐一点关系。老师的前面这里一起坐的。对。好，那旁边同学那个后面再帮我，对，过来一下，像这里前面也可以，对。好，前面，好，我等一下在这 ，OK， 好，都看得到吗？好，那我们先一张口罩，好不好？对，先一张口罩。好，那我们就说1、2、3站哦，还是要地瓜叶，好，好，先来个1、2、3站，1、2、3站，好，再一张比个耶，地瓜耶，好，那把口罩拿掉一张 ，OK，
照相可以拿掉。
学校现在规定是可以的。
好，来，照完之后就把这本盒带掉
好，3、 3是什么
3是台德关系好。
好，再来台德关系好。OK， 好，第4个最后一张，比个爱心，1、2、3，爱心。好，谢谢。那感谢大家今天的参与，那我们活动就到这边。有需要盖章的可以到我们12楼。
谢谢大家哈。
好，下午1点、2点之后，对，下午2点之后，在我们的上班时间。
你是所里学生还是师范系的？那你是所里学生？那你那个照片可以传给我。因为我都说真好，那传给社监嘛。好，分给我关注。
是有要报告这样，然后拍一下。
你要一起练。这个吗？更不要了。因为这样很棒。对了。最大就这样。下午点看。
那个传如啊，等一下的照片，那个最后的团体照要给我，要给。
不要多信息不要。你现在在这边的时间。
好啊，那个完好。
这个。
这套我参加哦。
好，因为有学生要拍那个。
镜头还没关，等一下。还没关。对。
我以为已经关了。